I rise this morning, just before the noon hour, to talk about our children, a topic which doesn't get nearly enough attention here in Washington. I'll try to focus just on one issue today, but both parties in this body and in the other body indicate on a pretty frequent basis that they are in favor of supporting strategies to protect our children and help our children, but not enough attention is paid to what that strategy should be and what the elements of it should be. I believe it should at least have four major component parts. One is to make sure that children have every opportunity for more early learning. In addition to that, we need to make sure that more children are covered by health insurance and get quality health care. We made a lot of strides in that the last couple of decades, but we still have a ways to go on that. We need to make sure that children are protected, an issue that I'll speak about today in particular. And obviously we want to put in place better strategies to make sure that children have enough to eat and are eating food that is nutritious. So today I'll focus on the question of protection. We know that in the last, or I should say as we head into the last couple of days of the school year, children are starting to look forward to summer activities like camp and other summer sports and other activities. That's good news. The bad news is that that can create opportunities for people that would do them harm. It's important, I think, to reiterate the responsibility that adults have generally, but in particular at this time of the year, that adults have an abiding responsibility to protect children from harm and to speak up, literally to speak up, when they suspect that a child is a victim of abuse or neglect. We know that many cases of abuse and neglect go unreported, sometimes for years, sometimes even until a child has died or suffered either other terrible consequences as a result of years of neglect or abuse. For example, in the year 2012, in Pennsylvania, 3,565 substantiated reports of child abuse and neglect, and across the nation, 678,047 children were victims of abuse and neglect in the country as a whole. I think it's important to point out, though, in the number that I read for Pennsylvania, 3,565 substantiated reports of child abuse and neglect. That means two things. It was reported, and we know that the overwhelming number don't get reported. So even among the category of those that were reported, they had to be substantiated reports of abuse and neglect. I believe that the number, if you had just a broad category of children in our state, and true of a lot of other states as well, that are the victims of abuse and neglect, it would far, far exceed 3,565 cases. But that number alone is horrific and should cause us to do a lot more than we're doing right now, not just in Pennsylvania, but around the country. We saw in Pennsylvania a horrific example. Many people read the news about Penn State over the last couple of years. In that case, children being abused by an individual they're supposed to be able to trust, an authority figure, and other authority figures did little about it to report it. There's a significant variation, we know, across the country in the types of or categories of adults who are required by law to report suspected or known child abuse and neglect. Not all states require, for example, camp counselors to be so-called mandated reporters under the law, meaning an adult that has a legal duty by statute to report on child abuse or suspected child abuse. Some states have a long list of categories, some states have shorter lists. We know that not all states require camp counselors or even coaches to report instances. So we need to do something about that, and that's why I've introduced legislation to directly address it. The Speak Up to Protect Every Abused Kid Act, which is more simply known as the Speak Up Act. This act would require all states to pass and enforce a law requiring adults with a professional responsibility to children to report instances of known or suspected child abuse in order for states to receive funding through the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, so-called CAPTA legislation, the federal statute that focuses on child abuse and neglect prevention and response. So if you're going to have the benefit of those federal dollars, you've got to do more to protect children. That's what we're saying to states. The legislation will close a loophole that allows abusers to get away with heinous crimes and emphasizes the responsibility of all adults to protect children from abuse and neglect. States have a wide variety of standards, as I mentioned, for who they designate as so-called mandated reporters. Some states require all medical professionals to be mandated reporters. Others only specify certain types of healthcare providers. Under the Speak Up Act, states would have to require all of these adults to be mandated reporters or forfeit their federal funding under the so-called CAPTA Act, Child Abuse and Prevention Treatment Act. The Speak Up Act also requires that these mandated reporters give their reports directly to state authorities responsible for investigating child abuse and neglect. In some states, in Pennsylvania, I'm happy to report, there's a unified system of reporting, which is called the Child Line, that accepts all reports. In this case, in Pennsylvania, you can call an 800 number, and you could report child abuse and neglect. I have asked myself, and I'm not sure we'll ever get the answer to this, but what if in the not only in a random set of cases, but what if in the case of Penn State, if one adult or more than one adult had called an 800 number early in the case history, even with a suspicion, reason grounded in fact, but a suspicion or direct evidence of child abuse. What if they had called that number? Could children have been protected? Could child abuse have been prevented? I don't know the answer to that, but I think if more people use that kind of a method, they might be able to prevent a lot more cases of abuse. So other states may require reporting to law enforcement or so-called child protective agencies. Finally, the act itself, the Speak Up Act, closes a loophole in existing law that can leave children in danger because they're abusers from another state, or because the child was visiting another state when he or she was abused. In the summer, this becomes especially relevant when children may be attending camps where they're not just going back and forth from the camp. It's a camp where they stay overnight, night after night, or other programs that they might have access to, or be enrolled in, I should say, in another state. Under the Speak Up Act, we make it clear that the state where the incident occurred, has the obligation to investigate the incident, and other states must help out if necessary. So that gives a further protection to children that's not in the law today. The legislation, the Speak Up Act, will provide as well standard reporting requirements across all states, while still allowing states to go beyond what is required if they seek to do that. I don't know why we don't have this in law already. Why should we have a variety of measures in place to protect children? We should standardize that. Every state should meet a certain minimum standard when it comes to protecting children. If states want to add people to their mandated reporter list, require more adults or more categories of adults to be listed, then they could do that. But there should be a standard reporting requirement across the country. So as we begin the summer, I'd urge adults who work with children to remember their responsibility to speak up and to act to protect children. to make sure they know how to report abuse and neglect if necessary. So if you're in that category of mandated reporters already, you obviously not only have a legal duty to report, but I think you have a responsibility to find out today how you report. What method will you employ? What resource will you access to report instances of child abuse or suspected child abuse? But even if you're not sure that you're in that category of mandated reporter, if you're an adult and you have an obligation or your job entails working with children, I believe you have an obligation to find out not only whether you're a mandated reporter, but how you can report suspected cases of abuse and neglect. And of course, if you're an adult that may not be legally required, it doesn't, of course, foreclose the possibility that you could and should report instances of abuse and neglect, even if you don't have a legal duty. I believe every adult has some kind of duty, maybe not in law, but certainly a duty as a citizen and as an adult to be vigilant, to keep your eyes open, to focus your attention on protecting children. We all have, I think, an abiding obligation. So this is the time of the year when children have a lot of time away from school, and they have a lot of enjoyment of the summer. We should make sure that we're being very vigilant, though, at this time of the year, to speak up and to protect our children.